Okay, so here's more or less what we're going to be animating today. So let's hop right into After Effects and get started. We've already laid out our composition and worked on some of our main design elements. So let's go ahead and start animating. We've pre-comped everything so that we can add this warp on top. So we're going to want to go into this pre-composed layer to begin to animate. So we'll just click in here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to animate our two lines on the side. So what I'm going to do, just to make these really obvious, is I'm going to select both of these bars and I'm going to solo them so we can ignore everything else for now. So what I want these to do is I want these to slide up from the bottom, and I want the left one to scoot over to the left. I'm also going to add some opacity blinks to give them a more digital feel. So why don't we just go ahead and rename this one bar 2 so we know. And I want this first one to scale up as it moves into position. But I want to make sure I scale it from the bottom, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my anchor point, which is this point here in the center, which is where all of our animation take place. So I can select the anchor point tool here, or just press Y on the keyboard, grab our anchor point, and if I hold Shift, I can make sure I'm only moving in the Y-axis, and I can drag this right down to the bottom. So I know the two parameters I'm going to use are the position and the scale. So I'll press P on the keyboard to bring up position, and if I hold Shift and press S, I'll also bring up the scale parameter. If I press P and then just S, it'll switch between the two, but I won't have them both at the same time. So press P to bring up position, hold Shift, and press S to bring up the scale. As a rule of thumb, I like to have all my animations last about 20 frames. Obviously this can be adjusted to taste and to fit whatever animation you're doing, but for now, I'll start with 20 frames. So I'll advance 20 frames in the timeline by pressing Command, Shift, and the right arrow to move forward 10 and 10 again. And I'll set a keyframe for position and one for scale, because that's where I want our animation to end. So now I'll go back to the beginning, and I'll make sure we fit completely in the window. And I'll drag our position down about halfway here. 1,000 seems like a nice even number, so let's go with that. I also want to make sure we scale up just on the Y-axis. So I'll uncheck this chain link here to unconstrain the properties, and I'll scale down our Y parameter to 0. So now as I slide, you can see this scales up and moves into place. I'll select both my keyframes by dragging a box over them, pressing F9 to easy ease them, and I'll hop into our graph editor here. Now you want to make sure you're adjusting the speed graph and not the value graph. So your graph may look different than mine initially. In order to make sure you're adjusting the speed, you can come into this checklist down here, and your graph may look like this for value, but we'll just check the speed box to adjust the speed. We'll select both our last keyframes, and we'll take our handle, and we'll drag those all the way to the left. So this means our animation is going to start really fast and then ease into place slowly. So if we play this back, shoots up and eases in. Shoots up and eases in. The last thing I want to do is I want to adjust the opacity. So I'll press T on the keyboard to bring up opacity, and we'll set a keyframe down at 0. So now I'll advance forward 2 frames on the keyboard by pressing Command and the right arrow to move forward 2 frames. Zoom in here a little bit. I'll set this opacity up to 100. I'll advance 3 more keyframes, set this back down to 0. Go ahead 5 frames, set it to 100 again. And these can be kind of arbitrary, the timing in between. It's just to get a little random motion for our blinks. And we'll make sure we'll come 100, 1 frame, 0, back up to 100, right at frame 20. So you can see now if we play this back, we get some blinking as it scales into place. But if we scrub slowly, we can see it fades in between our keyframes. I want this to be a lot harsher. So I'm going to select all our keyframes. I'm going to right click on our keyframes and I'm going to select Toggle Hold Keyframe. A hold keyframe means that it won't interpolate between our keyframes. It'll just be a hard set at the numbers we have. So now if we play it backwards, we can see our blink is a little more intense. Maybe I want to scoot this one in a little bit, and this one as well, just to kind of even those out a little. That's looking a little better to me. So now what I'm going to do, instead of repeating this animation for our left bar here, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate the one we already made. So I'll select our object and I'll press Command D on the keyboard to duplicate. Now if we press U on the keyboard to show our keyframes, you can see we've duplicated all our keyframes. So what I want this to do is I want this to do the same thing. And then I'm just going to advance 10 more keyframes. I'm going to shoot this out to the left, so it lines up with our first bar. And you can see right here that we sort of have this weird curve, and I'm guessing that's because this is set to auto Bezier keyframes. So if we play it back, you can see how it kind of slides out to the right and then comes over. So I'm going to select all our keyframes, right click, go into keyframe interpolation, and change our spatial interpolation to linear. You can see now we have this linear move, which is much more what I want. So if we play this back, you can see these come up together, and then our left bar shoots out to the left. We can delete this one because we're no longer using it, and we'll just go ahead and rename this bar 2 for good measure. So the next thing we want to do is I want to bring on our main back rectangle.